The big room was full of noise from many different types of aliens talking at the same time. Janae sat very still at the human table in the middle of all this chaos. She was wearing her blue diplomatic clothes and kept her hands folded on the table in front of her like a good ambassador should do. Around her there were creatures from dozens of different worlds all talking about who owned what planets and who could fight the best. The Vortakians were the loudest ones in the room. They were very tall with blue skin that looked like it was made of metal, and they had 4 arms each. Their leader was General Vex, who liked to stand up and wave all his arms around when he talked. He was telling everyone about how fast his soldiers could kill enemies and how no other species in the galaxy was better at fighting than his people. Where Janae watched him talk and noticed how he kept looking at the human table with a mean smile on his face. Every few minutes he would say something about how slow and stupid humans were. The other aliens in the room would laugh when he said these things, and some of them would add their own jokes about how weak humans looked. Sitting next to Janae was Taemin, who was also a human diplomat, but he was newer at this job than she was. He had only been working with aliens for 6 months, and he still got angry when they made fun of humans. Janae could see his face getting red every time General Vex said something mean about their species. The Catherians were another group that liked to talk about how much better they were than humans. They had 6 eyes that could see in all directions at once, and they kept saying that humans were blind because they only had 2 eyes. Their ambassador was a female named Vex who had green skin and long tentacles instead of hair. She would point at Janae and Taemin with her tentacles and make clicking sounds that meant she was laughing at them. Then there were the Zillops, who had poison in their claws and sharp teeth. They were small but very fast, and they liked to show off by moving around the room so quickly that other aliens could barely see them. Their leader kept saying that humans move like old sick animals and that any Zillop child could beat a human adult in a fight. Janae listened to all of this and did not say anything she had learned long ago, that getting angry would not help humans get better treatment from these alien species. Instead, she just sat there and remembered every insult they said. She also watched how each species moved and fought when they got excited, because that was useful information that might help her later. What none of these aliens knew was that Janae had not always been a diplomat before. She started working with alien governments. She had spent 15 years as a soldier in Earth's most secret military unit. She had learned how to use every type of weapon that humans had ever made, and she could put together or take apart guns and bombs even when she could not see them. During her military time, Janae had been sent to places where bad people were hiding, and she had to go into buildings full of enemies and stop them before they could hurt innocent people. She was so good at this job that other soldiers would ask her to teach them her methods. Her record for clearing out rooms full of bad guys had never been beaten by anyone else in the human military. She had fought in wars on 3 different planets and had saved the lives of hundreds of people by being faster and smarter than her enemies. But now she was supposed to be a peaceful diplomat who solved problems with words instead of weapons. The human government had asked her to take this job because they needed someone who could stay calm when aliens were being mean to humans. Min leaned over to her and whispered very quietly that they should tell the council leaders that these aliens were being unfair to humans and breaking the rules about treating all species with respect. Janae shook her head no, because she knew that complaining would just make the other aliens think humans were weak crybabies who could not handle a few mean words. General Vex was still talking, and now he was telling a story about a battle where Vortakian soldiers had killed 50 human soldiers in less than 5 minutes. He said that the humans had been so slow and clumsy that they could not even point their weapons in the right direction before his people shot them all down. The other aliens in the room made approving sounds, and some of them clapped their hands or tentacles or claws. The Catherian ambassador Vex added her own story about how her people had once captured a group of human spies who were trying to steal alien technology. She said the humans had been so loud and obvious that her people had heard them coming from miles away and had time to set traps for them. She made more clicking sounds that meant she thought this story was very funny. A delegate from the Scaran Empire stood up to talk about how his species had natural armor that could stop any human weapon and how their warriors could tear human soldiers apart with their bare claws. He flexed his muscles to show How strong he was, and the sharp spikes on his arms glowed with a dangerous light. Jin-A continued to sit quietly and listen, but inside her mind, she was thinking about all the ways she could defeat each of these alien species if she had to fight. Then she noticed that the Vortakians were fast, but they were not very smart about tactics. They just ran straight at enemies and tried to overwhelm them with speed. The Catherians had good vision, but they were not very strong, and their tentacles would be easy to grab and use against them. The Zillops were quick, but they were small, and their poison claws would not work if someone wore the right kind of armor. The Scaran looked tough, but their spikes made them top-heavy, and they would fall down easily if someone hit them in the right spot. All of these species thought they were perfect fighters, but Jin-A could see weaknesses that they did not know they had. As the meeting went on, more and more aliens joined in making fun of humans. They shared stories about human soldiers being too scared to fight or too stupid to use their weapons properly. Some of them acted out little plays where they pretended to be clumsy humans stumbling around and failing to defend themselves. The whole room was laughing except for Jin-A and Taemin. Finally, General Vex stood up and pointed directly at the human table. He announced to everyone in the room that humans were the most pathetic fighting species in the entire galaxy, and that his people could destroy Earth with a small patrol unit in less than 1 day. He said humans were so slow and weak that they could not kill anything quickly, even if their lives depended on it. The room erupted in cheers and applause from all the alien delegates. They were all agreeing with General Vex and adding their own comments about how useless humans were in combat situations. Jin-A felt Taemin getting more and more angry next to her, but she just smiled, a small cold smile that none of the aliens noticed. She was thinking about how wrong they all were, and how much they were going to regret underestimating humans when the time came to prove them wrong. Suddenly, loud alarms started screaming throughout the entire space station. The sound was so loud that it hurt everyone's ears and made them cover them with their hands or tentacles or whatever body parts they had. Red lights began flashing everywhere, making the big council room look like it was on fire, even though there was no real fire. The emergency lights made everything look scary and dangerous. All the aliens who had been laughing and making fun of humans just a few seconds ago suddenly looked very worried and afraid. They stopped talking and started looking around the room, trying to figure out what was happening. Some of them jumped up from their seats and started running toward the doors that led to the escape pods. General Vex was the first one to pull out his weapons. He had 4 different guns, one in each of his 4 hands, and he was pointing them in different directions, trying to cover all the entrances to the room. The other Vortakian soldiers who were with him also got their weapons ready, and they formed a circle around their general to protect him. The Catherians turned on their personal force fields, which made blue bubbles of energy appear around each of them. Their 6 eyes were moving in all directions at once, trying to see if there were any enemies sneaking up on them from hidden places. Their ambassador Vex was making nervous clicking sounds, and her tentacles were waving around like she was very scared. The computer voice that controlled the space station started talking in a calm, mechanical way that did not match how dangerous the situation was becoming. It said that there had been a security breach in the lower levels of the station, and that armed intruders were moving through the corridors. The voice also said that several security teams had been eliminated and that the defensive systems had been damaged. Jin-A stayed sitting at her table while all the other aliens were panicking and running around. She did not look scared at all, and she did not try to run away like the others. Instead, she was watching everything that was happening and listening carefully to all the information that was being announced over the speaker. Taemin was not as calm as Jin-A, and he started to stand up from his chair, but she put her hand on his arm to make him sit back down. She gave him a look that told him to stay quiet and let her handle whatever was about to happen. He had never seen her look so serious before, and it made him realize that maybe she knew more about dangerous situations than he had thought. The main doors to the council room suddenly burst open, and Security Chief Krim came running in with what was left of his security team. Krim was a Dulakian, which meant he was covered in thick armor that looked like it was made of stone. His species was known for being very tough and hard to kill, but even he looked worried and out of breath. Krim announced to everyone in the room that they were facing a very serious threat, he said that unknown enemies had somehow gotten onto the station and were using advanced technology that the security forces had never seen before. These intruders were moving through the station and killing everyone they found without making any noise or setting off any alarms. General Vex stepped forward with all his weapons still drawn and demanded to know how many enemies they were dealing with. Krim shook his big armored head and said that nobody knew the exact number because the intruders had some kind of stealth technology that made them invisible to the station's sensors. What made the situation even worse was that these mysterious enemies seemed to know exactly how to fight against every type of alien species. They were eliminating entire security teams before anyone could send a warning message to the control room. It was like they had studied every species in the galaxy and learned the best ways to kill each one. The lights in the room suddenly went completely dark and everyone started screaming in fear. A few seconds later, the emergency power came on, but it was much dimmer than the normal lights, and it made weird shadows dance on the walls. The red emergency lights made everyone look like they were covered in blood. Through the air vents in the ceiling, they could all hear strange sounds that might have been footsteps or might have been something else entirely. The sounds were coming from different directions, which made it impossible to tell where the enemies were or how many of them there were. Some of the sounds were like clicking or tapping, while others were like metal scraping against metal. Janae remained completely calm during all of this chaos, while aliens all around her were crying and screaming and trying to hide under tables. She reached into her diplomatic bag very slowly and carefully so that nobody would notice what she was doing. Her fingers found what looked like an ordinary pen that diplomats used for signing important documents, but this was not an ordinary pen at all. Janae twisted it in a special way, and it came apart into 3 different pieces. Each piece had hidden mechanisms inside that could be put together to make something completely different. When she connected all the pieces together, she had a small but very deadly weapon that looked nothing like the innocent pen. It had Benjamin watched her do this, and his mouth fell open in surprise. He had been working with Janae for months, but he had never known that she carried weapons disguised as normal diplomatic tools. He started to ask her what she was doing, but she held up one finger to tell him to be quiet. She also pulled other things out of her bag that had looked like normal items that any diplomat might carry. There was what had appeared to be a small calculator, but when she opened it up, it contained ammunition for her weapon. There was also a decorative pin that she wore on her jacket that turned out to have tiny electronic components inside it while she was putting together her hidden weapon. Janae was also listening to the sounds coming from the walls and ceiling. She was using her military training to figure out how many enemies there were and what direction they were moving, and the other aliens were too scared to think clearly, but she was analyzing everything like the professional soldier she had once been. More strange sounds came from above their heads, and now they could tell that whatever was making the sounds was getting closer to their location. The enemies had been working their way through the entire station level by level, and now they were almost at the council chambers where all the most important aliens were gathered. Security Chief Krim tried to contact other parts of the station on his communication device, but all he got was static or silence. Every security team that had been sent to fight the intruders had stopped responding, which meant they were probably all dead. The enemies were not just defeating the station's defenses, they were completely destroying them. General Vex was still trying to act brave and tough, but Janae could see that he was actually very scared. His 4 hands were shaking slightly as he held his weapons, and his blue skin had turned a paler color. The other Vortakian soldiers were looking to him for orders, but he did not seem to know what to tell them. The zealot delegates were running around the room very fast, using their natural speed to check all the doors and windows, but there was nowhere safe to go. The space station was completely sealed off, and the enemies controlled most of it now. The only place left was the council chamber, and the enemies were coming for them next. Janae finished assembling her weapon and checked to make sure it was working properly. She had done this same action thousands of times during her military service, and her hands moved automatically without her having to think about what she was doing. The familiar weight of the weapon in her hands made her feel more confident about what was coming. She looked around the room at all the aliens who had been making fun of humans just a few minutes earlier. Now they were all terrified and helpless. While she was the only one who seemed ready to actually fight back against whatever was hunting them, it was almost funny how quickly things had changed. The sounds from the ceiling were getting louder and closer, and Janae knew that very soon she was going to have to show all these aliens exactly what humans were really capable of when they needed to survive. The first enemy dropped down from a hole in the ceiling like a deadly shadow falling from the sky. It was huge, almost 8 feet tall and covered completely in black armor that seemed to move and change colors like it was alive. The armor shifted from black to gray to the same color as the walls, making it very hard to see exactly where the creature was standing. This was not like any alien species that anyone in the council had ever seen before. The armor covered every part of its body, so nobody could tell what it actually looked like underneath. Multiple weapons were built right into the armor itself, and there were glowing red lights where its eyes should be. The way it moved was too smooth and perfect, like it was part machine and part living creature. Before any of the aliens in the room could react or even understand what they were looking at, the intruder raised one of its arm weapons and fired a bright beam of energy that was so hot it made the air sizzle. The beam hit 2 Catharan delegates who were sitting near the front of the room, and they disappeared completely in a flash of white light. Their personal force fields that were supposed to protect them from any attack did absolutely nothing against this weapon. The energy beam went right through the blue protective bubbles like they were made of soap. Instead of advanced alien technology, the 2 Catherians did not even have time to scream before they were gone. The creature moved with incredible speed that was faster than anything the Vortakians had ever seen. It ran across the room and killed 3 more delegates before General Dex could even lift his 4 weapons to point them at the enemy. Its movements were so quick and smooth that it looked like it was dancing instead of fighting. General Dex finally got all 4 of his plasma rifles aimed at the intruder, and he fired them all at the same time. The bright energy bolts from his weapons lit up the entire room, but when they hit the black armor, they passed right through it like it was not even there. The armor had somehow changed to become see-through just for the few seconds when the weapons were firing at it. The intruder responded to General Dex's attack by shooting a net made of crackling electricity from one of its arm weapons. The electric net wrapped around the Vortakian general, and he started shaking and twitching as the electricity ran through his body. Then he fell down on the floor, unable to move. All his 4 weapons clattered across the floor, making loud metallic sounds. More holes appeared in the ceiling as other intruders began dropping down into the room. Some of them came through the walls by cutting perfect circles in the metal panels. Others seemed to just walk through solid surfaces like they were made of air instead of matter. Each new enemy that appeared was exactly like the first one, with the same black shifting armor and the same deadly weapons. There were now 6 of these creatures in the room, and they were working together like they shared the same mind. They moved in perfect coordination with each other, never getting in each other's way and never wasting any movements. Each one seemed to know exactly what the others were going to do before they did it. The aliens in the room were screaming and running in all directions, trying to find somewhere safe to hide, but there was nowhere to go. The intruders had positioned themselves to block all the exits, and they were systematically eliminating every delegate in the chamber. Their weapons seemed to be designed specifically to defeat the natural defenses of each alien species. Security Chief Krim and his remaining soldiers tried to fight, but their weapons were completely useless against the intruders' armor. The bullets and energy beams from their guns either bounced off or passed right through the enemies without causing any damage at all. It was like they were trying to fight ghosts that could become solid only when they wanted to attack. One of the intruders walked up to a group of Scaran delegates who were huddled together, trying to use their natural armor to protect themselves. The creature looked at them for a moment like it was studying them. Then it fired a weapon that seemed to dissolve their armor like it was made of sugar instead of the toughest material in the galaxy. The Zilup delegates tried to use their incredible speed to run away, but the intruders were somehow even faster. They caught the fleeing Zilups in mid-run and eliminated them with weapons that fired faster than the eye could follow. Even the quickest species in the known galaxy was too slow to escape from these mysterious enemies. Janae had been watching all of this happen while staying perfectly still at her diplomatic table. She was studying the way the intruders moved and fought. And noting the capabilities of their weapons and armor, these were not random terrorists or pirates who had stumbled onto the station by accident. They were highly trained professional killers. She could see that each intruder was equipped with detailed information about every alien species in the council. Their weapons and tactics were specifically designed to counter the strengths and exploit the weaknesses of Vortakians, Catherians, Dulakians, Zilops, and all the other races that made up the galactic government. But as she watched the systematic slaughter happening around her, Janae realized something very important. None of the intruders had tried to attack her or Tamin yet. They seemed to be focused on eliminating all the other species. First, like humans, were not considered a priority threat. This was a mistake that she intended to make them regret. The intruders moved through the room like efficient killing machines, eliminating delegates in order of how dangerous their species were supposed to be. The Vortakians with their speed were targeted first, then the Catherians with their advanced senses, then the Dulakians with their heavy armor. Each species fell to weapons designed specifically to defeat their natural advantages. Janae noticed that the creature's armor was constantly scanning and analyzing everything in the room, including her and Tamin, but whatever information they had about humans was apparently telling them that the two diplomats posed no threat at all. They were being ignored like they were just furniture instead of living beings. This gave Janae the opportunity. She needed to continue studying her enemies without being attacked. She watched how they coordinated their movements and communicated with each other through some kind of silent signal system. She also observed the brief moments when their armor became solid in order to fire weapons. Most importantly, she noticed that while their armor could shift between solid and transparent states, it could not do both at the same time. When they were firing their weapons, the armor had to become solid, which meant it could be damaged by the right kind of attack at exactly the right moment. Security. Chief Krim was trying to get his remaining soldiers to form some kind of defensive line, but half of them were already down and the others were too scared to follow orders effectively. The intruders were picking them off one by one with cold mechanical precision that showed no emotion or hesitation. One of the armored killers began walking slowly toward Janae's position at the diplomatic table. Its weapon was charging up with a high-pitched whining sound that meant it was preparing to fire. She could see the red glow from its eyes getting brighter as it focused on her as its next target too. The intruder, she probably looked like just another helpless victim waiting to be eliminated. Its programming would have told it that humans were slow, weak, and completely harmless in combat situations. This assumption was about to prove fatal for the creature and all of its companions. Janae remained completely motionless as the intruder approached her. She was counting the steps and calculating the exact moment when she would need to move. Her 15 years of military training were taking over, and the patient diplomat was disappearing to be replaced by one of Earth's most deadly soldiers. The creature raised its weapon and aimed it directly at her head. The charging sound reached its peak, which meant the weapon was about to fire. Jin-A waited until the very last possible second because timing was going to be everything in what happened next. In that final moment before the intruder fired, she allowed herself a small cold smile because she knew something that none of these aliens understood. Humans might not be the fastest or strongest species in the galaxy, but they were definitely the most dangerous when someone made the mistake of threatening their lives. Jin-A exploded into motion faster than any of the aliens had ever seen a human move. Her body uncoiled like a spring that had been compressed for too long and suddenly released all of its stored energy at once. She rolled sideways off her chair. Just as the intruder's weapon fired and the deadly energy beam passed through the space where her head had been only a split second before, her first shot from the disguised weapon hit the intruder right in the center of its chest where the armor was thickest. The creature had not expected any resistance from a human, so its defensive systems were not prepared for the type of projectile that Jin-A was using. Instead of energy beams that could be deflected, her weapon fired solid metal bullets that punched through the shifting armor like it was made of paper. The intruder staggered backward as sparks flew from the hole in its chest. Its armor began flickering between different colors as its systems tried to compensate for the damage, but Jin-A was already moving again. She fired 2 more shots that hit the creature in what she had identified as critical system nodes. During her careful observation, The first intruder collapsed to the floor with its armor sparking and smoking. The red lights where its eyes had been went dark, and it stopped moving completely. The other intruders in the room immediately recognized that they were facing a new type of threat, and they began turning their attention away from the other aliens to focus on Jin'ei, but she was not where they expected her to be. Jin'ei had already rolled behind an overturned table and was moving toward a better position. While firing controlled bursts at the remaining enemies, she was not trying to kill them all with single shots. Instead, she was targeting their weapon systems and trying to disable their ability to fight back. Her second target lost its right arm weapon when one of her bullets hit the energy coupling that powered it. The weapon exploded in a shower of sparks, and the intruder began moving differently as its balance was thrown off. Jin'ei filed this information away for later use and continued moving through the chaos of the destroyed council chamber. The aliens who were still alive watched in complete shock as Jin'ei moved through the room like she was performing a deadly dance. She would appear from behind, cover fire several precise shots, and then disappear again before the intruders could target her properly. Her movements were smooth and efficient, with no wasted motion or unnecessary risks. What the aliens had never understood about human military tactics was that speed alone meant nothing without intelligence and planning. Jin'ei was not trying to be faster than her enemies because she knew that was impossible. Instead, she was being smarter than them by using their own coordination and superior numbers against them. She vaulted over a fallen Dulakian delegate and used his stone-like armor as cover while she reloaded her weapon. The intruders fired at her position, but their energy beams could not penetrate the natural armor that had protected the Dulakian species for millions of years. Jin'ei had recognized this opportunity and was using every advantage she could find. Her next series of shots targeted the sensors and communication equipment that allowed the intruders to work together as a team. Without their ability to coordinate their attacks, they began getting in each other's way and firing at positions where their allies were standing. This confusion gave Jin'ei even more opportunities to attack. She rolled across the floor and came up firing behind a cluster of overturned chairs. Her bullets found the weak points in two more intruders' armor and disabled their primary weapon systems. One of them tried to switch to a backup weapon, but Jin'ei put 3 rounds into its shoulder joint and the entire arm stopped working properly. The surviving delegates could hardly believe what they were seeing. The same species that they had been mocking for being slow and clumsy was moving through their attackers like a force of nature. Jin'ei seemed to be everywhere at once, appearing from impossible angles and firing with accuracy that exceeded anything they had thought humans were capable of. General Vex, who was still paralyzed on the floor, could only watch as Jin'ei systematically dismantled the group of intruders that had seemed completely invincible just minutes before. He tried to speak, but the electric net had damaged his vocal cords, and all he could manage was a weak whisper asking how this was possible. But Jin'ei was not trying to outrun or overpower her enemies. She was outsmarting them at every turn. When they tried to surround her, she had already moved to a position that put them in a crossfire with each other. When they attempted to use their superior technology, she countered with tactics that their programming had never encountered before. Her weapon was also designed according to human engineering principles that the intruders had not expected. Unlike the energy weapons used by most alien species, Jin'ei bullets could not be deflected by force fields or absorbed by adaptive armor. They were simple pieces of metal that relied on kinetic energy to do damage. The intruders began changing their tactics to try to deal with this unexpected threat. They started moving more cautiously and trying to coordinate their attacks better, but Jin'ei had already identified their new strategy and was adapting her own approach to counter it. She used a broken piece of ceiling panel as a shield while advancing on 2 intruders who were trying to flank her position. As they focused their fire on the metal panel, she slid underneath their line of sight and fired upward into the less protected undersides of their armor. Both creatures went down with critical damage to their power cores. The 4th intruder tried to retreat toward the wall where it had originally entered the room, but Jin'ei had anticipated this move. She had positioned herself so that any retreat would require the creature to cross an open area where she could get a clear shot. Her bullet caught it in the back. As it tried to phase through the wall, security chief Krim, who had been watching the entire battle from his position behind an overturned desk, finally found his voice. He called out to ask Janae how she had learned to fight like this, but she was too focused on the remaining enemies to answer him right away. The fifth intruder activated some kind of emergency protocol that made its armor glow brighter and move faster than before. It charged directly at Janae with weapons firing continuously, trying to overwhelm her with sheer firepower, but she had been expecting this kind of desperate attack and was ready for it. She dropped flat to the floor as the creature rushed over her position, then rolled and fired upward into its legs. The shots severed important cables and hydraulic lines that controlled the intruder's movement. It crashed to the floor in a tangle of sparking metal and damaged systems only. One intruder remained operational, and it seemed to realize that its mission had failed catastrophically, began broadcasting some kind of distress signal while backing toward the nearest exit, but Janae was not going to let it escape to report what had happened. Here she moved to block its retreat route and began her final approach. The last enemy raised its weapons for one more attack, but Janae could see that its systems were already damaged from the battle. Its aim was off, and its movements were slower than they should have been. Her last few shots were perfectly placed to disable the creature's remaining weapons and mobility systems. It fell to the floor next to its companions, unable to move or fight back. The red glow from its eyes faded to nothing as its power systems finally gave out completely. The entire battle had lasted less than 5 minutes from start to finish. Janae had eliminated 8 highly advanced combat units that were equipped with technology superior to anything the Council species possessed. She had done it alone, using nothing but a single human weapon and her military training. The council chamber was now completely silent except for the sound of sparking electronics and the heavy breathing of the surviving delegates. Janae stood among the wreckage of the intruders and calmly began checking each one to make sure they were no longer a threat to anyone. Her movements were professional and methodical, showing no signs of the intense combat she had just survived. To the watching aliens, it seemed impossible that the same species they had been insulting just a few minutes earlier had demonstrated such devastating effectiveness in battle. Taemin was the first to speak, and his voice was full of amazement and confusion. He asked Janae where she had learned to fight like that, and how she had known exactly what to do against enemies that none of them had ever seen before. Janae looked up from examining one of the fallen intruders and gave him a small smile that contained secrets he was only beginning to understand. She told him that every human diplomat received basic defensive training, but she did not mention that her training had been far more advanced than basic. The truth was that Janae was one of Earth's most elite special operations soldiers, specifically chosen for diplomatic assignments where her unique skills might be needed. But the aliens in the room did not need to know that particular detail right now. Janae moved carefully through the destroyed council chamber, checking each fallen intruder to make sure they were completely disabled and could not suddenly come back to life to attack the survivors. She had learned during her military service that enemies with advanced technology could sometimes repair themselves or have backup systems that activated after apparent defeat. As she examined the creatures, she discovered that they were not entirely organic but were actually cyborgs that combined living tissue with sophisticated mechanical components. Their armor and weapons were integrated directly into their bodies, making them incredibly dangerous, but also giving them weaknesses that could be exploited by someone who understood both biology and technology. The first intruder that she had defeated was still sparking occasionally from the damage to its chest systems. She could see through the holes in its armor that there were both organic organs and mechanical components. Inside, the creature had been designed to be the perfect fusion of natural abilities and artificial enhancement. Security Chief Krim slowly approached Janae's position while keeping his weapon ready in case any of the intruders were still dangerous. He was amazed by what he had witnessed, but he was also confused about how a human diplomat had been able to do something that his entire security force had failed to accomplish. He asked Janae how she had known exactly where to shoot the intruders to disable them so effectively. She explained that during the initial attack, she had been observing and analyzing their armor and weapons to identify weak points and system vulnerabilities. This was standard tactical assessment that any trained soldier would perform what she did not tell him was that her analysis had been far more sophisticated than basic military observation. She had been trained in xenobiology and alien technology assessment specifically so she could identify the weaknesses of any species or artificial system she might encounter during her covert missions. The surviving delegates were slowly emerging from their hiding places. Behind overturned furniture and debris, they looked at Jin'ei with a mixture of awe, fear, and confusion. None of them had ever seen a human fight before, and what they had just witnessed completely contradicted everything they thought they knew about human capabilities. General Vex was beginning to recover from the paralysis caused by the electric net, and he was trying to understand what had happened. His forearms were twitching as feeling returned to them, and his voice was weak but getting stronger. He kept repeating that it should have been impossible for any human to move that fast or fight that effectively. Ambassador Vex from the Catharan delegation was clicking rapidly with her tentacles, which meant she was either very excited or very nervous. She had lost 2 of her fellow delegates in the initial attack, but she had also witnessed something that challenged everything her species believed about combat and survival. The Zilip survivors were moving around the room at their natural high speed, examining the fallen intruders from different angles. They were trying to figure out how Jin'ei had been able to target and hit enemies that were moving faster than their own species could track. This was particularly disturbing to them since speed was their greatest source of pride. Jin'ei finished her examination of the last intruder and stood up to address the group of survivors. She explained that the attackers had been equipped with detailed tactical information about every major galactic species. Their weapons and armor had been specifically designed to counter the natural abilities and common fighting techniques of each race. However, she continued, there had been no tactical profile for humans in their programming database. The attackers had been operating under the standard galactic assumption that humans were primitive and harmless. This had been their fatal mistake because they had not prepared for human combat methods. She showed the survivors how the intruder's armor had been designed to deflect energy weapons but was vulnerable to kinetic projectiles like bullets. Their sensors had been calibrated to track the movement patterns of known alien species but could not effectively predict human tactical thinking. The communication systems that allowed them to coordinate their attacks had been programmed with the combat doctrines of every major galactic military, but had no information about human special operations techniques. This meant that Jin'ei tactics had been completely unexpected and impossible for them to counter. Taemin asked Jin'ei why she had never mentioned that she had military training during all the months they had been working together. She replied that her previous experience had not seemed relevant to diplomatic work and that she preferred to solve problems with negotiation rather than violence when possible. What she did not say was that her true identity and background were classified at the highest levels of human government. Very few people knew that some human diplomats were actually elite soldiers who had been specially trained for situations where traditional diplomacy might not be sufficient. Security Chief Krim wanted to know how the intruders had managed to infiltrate the station without being detected by any of the security systems. Jin'ei suggested that they had probably used advanced stealth technology combined with detailed intelligence about the station's defenses and patrol schedules. She also pointed out that the attackers had moved through the station systematically, eliminating security teams in a specific order that prevented them from communicating warnings to each other. This indicated a level of planning and preparation that suggested they had been studying the station for a long time. The attack had not been a random act of terrorism but a carefully planned assassination mission designed to eliminate the leadership of the Galactic Council. The intruders had been equipped with the resources and information necessary to kill every major species representative except for humans, who had been considered too insignificant to worry about. General Vex, who was now able to sit up and speak more clearly, demanded to know why humans had hidden their true combat capabilities from the rest of the galaxy. Jin'ei replied that humans had never hidden anything but that other species had simply made assumptions based on incomplete information. She explained that humans preferred to be underestimated because it gave them tactical advantages in dangerous situations. When enemies believed that humans were weak and slow, they would not prepare adequate defenses against human capabilities. This had happened many times throughout human history. The truth was that human military doctrine was based on the principle that any enemy could be defeated if you understood their weaknesses and used the right tactics against them. Humans had spent centuries fighting each other and had developed incredibly sophisticated methods for analyzing and defeating different types of opponents. Ambassador Vex asked Jin-A if there were other human diplomats who had similar combat training. Jin-A gave her a small smile and said that all human representatives received basic defensive instruction. But she did not elaborate on what basic meant in human military terms. The reality was that every human diplomat assigned to work with alien species had at least some combat training, because Earth government knew that the galaxy was a dangerous place full of species that might decide to test human resolve. The level of training varied depending on the assignment and the perceived threat level. Janae had been chosen for the Galactic Council specifically because intelligence reports had suggested that there might be attempts to disrupt or attack the diplomatic process. Her presence had been intended as a precaution against exactly the kind of situation they had just survived as. The survivors began to process what had happened and started making plans to restore order to the station. Janae quietly began disassembling her weapon back into its innocent components. The pen calculator and decorative pin that had seemed so harmless were once again just ordinary diplomatic accessories. She knew that word of this incident would spread quickly throughout the galactic communication networks, and that every major species would soon be reevaluating their assessments of human capabilities. This would change the balance of power in galactic politics and make future diplomatic negotiations very different. The other species would no longer be able to dismiss humans as weak and primitive. Instead, they would have to acknowledge that humans possessed combat skills and tactical thinking that were at least equal to their own. This newfound respect would give humanity much more influence in galactic affairs. But Jin-A also knew that some species might decide that humans were now too dangerous to be allowed to participate in galactic government. There would probably be calls for restrictions on human diplomatic missions or demands for more information about human military capabilities. She would have to be very careful in her reports about this incident to make sure that she portrayed human abilities accurately without revealing too much about the true extent of Earth's military preparations. The goal was to earn respect, not to start a war. In the hours that followed the attack, investigation teams from multiple species arrived at the space station to examine the wreckage and try to understand what had happened. The fallen intruders were carefully studied by experts in alien technology and military tactics who were amazed by the advanced systems they discovered. Each intruder had been equipped with a sophisticated computer database that contained detailed profiles of every major species in the Galactic Council. The profiles included information about natural abilities, common fighting techniques, preferred weapons, and typical tactical approaches. This explained how they had been so effective against the various alien security forces. However, when the investigators searched through all the data, they found something very interesting. There was no profile for humans anywhere in the database. The intruders had been programmed with the standard galactic assumption that humans were too primitive and weak to pose any meaningful threat in combat situations. This oversight had cost them everything when they encountered Jin-A and her unexpected capabilities. The assassination mission had been planned perfectly to counter every known species except for the one that had actually defeated them. The irony was not lost on the investigators, who realized how dangerous assumptions could be. General Vex, who was recovering from his injuries in the station's medical bay, requested a private meeting with Jin-A. When she arrived, he looked at her with something that resembled respect mixed with confusion. He admitted that his people had been completely wrong about human combat abilities. He formally apologized for all the insults and jokes that he and his soldiers had made about human weakness and slowness. Jin-A accepted his apology gracefully, but pointed out that actions always spoke louder than words. When species made assumptions about each other without proper information, the results could be dangerous for everyone. The Vortakian general asked Jin-A if she would be willing to share some information about human fighting techniques with his military advisors. He explained that his species had always relied on speed and overwhelming firepower, but they had never considered the tactical approaches that humans used. Jin-A told him that she would discuss the possibility with her superiors, but that any military cooperation would need to be negotiated through proper diplomatic channels. She was not authorized to share classified information about human combat methods, even with allied species. Ambassador Vex from the Catharan delegation also requested a meeting with Janae. She was fascinated by how the human diplomat had been able to analyze and exploit the weaknesses of enemies that her own people with their superior senses had not even been able to track properly. Vex asked Janae if humans had some kind of enhanced sensory abilities that allowed them to process tactical information so quickly. Janae explained that humans did not have better senses than most species, but they had developed very sophisticated methods for analyzing and interpreting the information they could gather. She described how human military training emphasized pattern recognition, threat assessment, and tactical thinking rather than relying solely on natural physical advantages. This approach allowed humans to compete effectively against species that were stronger, faster, or better equipped than they were. The Catharan ambassador was particularly interested in how Janae had been able to predict and counter the intruders' coordinated attacks. Janae explained that human soldiers were trained to look for communication patterns and coordination methods, that enemies used to work together as a team. By disrupting these systems, humans could turn the enemy's superior numbers against them and create confusion that could be exploited. Janae had recognized the intruders' communication methods during her initial observations and had targeted those systems first to break up their teamwork. Word of the incident spread rapidly through the galactic communication networks. Within 24 hours, every major civilization in the galaxy had received detailed reports about what had happened at the diplomatic station. The story of how a single human had defeated 8 advanced combat units spread like wildfire through military and political circles. Intelligence agencies from dozens of species immediately began updating their assessments of human capabilities. The files that had previously described humans as slow, primitive, and militarily insignificant were hastily rewritten to reflect the new reality that Earth possessed combat skills that had been seriously underestimated. On many worlds, military commanders gathered their staff officers to discuss the implications of Janae performance against the intruders. If one human diplomat with basic equipment could eliminate threats that had overwhelmed entire security teams, what did that say about the true capabilities of Earth's actual military forces? The Galactic Council called an emergency session to address the security breach and discuss the broader implications of what had been revealed about human abilities. When the session reconvened 3 days later, the atmosphere in the chamber was completely different from the meeting where aliens had been mocking human weakness. Janae returned to her seat at the diplomatic table, but now the other delegates looked at her with cautious respect. Instead of dismissive contempt, no one made jokes about human combat abilities or suggested that Earth's representatives were too slow to be effective soldiers. General Vex gave a formal statement acknowledging that his previous comments about human military capabilities had been based on incomplete and inaccurate information. He announced that the Vortakian Empire would be interested in discussing military cooperation agreements with Earth government. Ambassador Vex made a similar statement on behalf of the Catharan Federation, expressing interest in learning more about human tactical analysis methods. Several other species also indicated that they would like to establish closer relationships with Earth now that they better understood human potential. However, not all the reactions were positive. Some delegates expressed concern that humans had been deliberately hiding their true capabilities in order to gain tactical advantages over other species. They demanded explanations for why Earth had not been more forthcoming about the combat training of their diplomatic personnel. Janae responded calmly that humans had never hidden anything, but that other species had made assumptions without asking for complete information. She pointed out that no one had ever specifically asked about the defensive training that human diplomats received before being assigned to work with alien governments. She also noted that every species kept certain information about their military capabilities classified for security reasons, and that Earth was simply following the same practices that everyone else used. Transparency was important, but so was protecting sensitive information that could be used against them. The debate continued for several hours, with some species arguing for greater disclosure requirements, and others defending the right to maintain operational security. Janae listened to all the arguments and responded to questions when asked, but she did not volunteer information beyond what was necessary. Finally, the council president called for order and announced that a special committee would be formed to review security procedures and information sharing protocols for all member species. The goal would be to prevent future misunderstandings while respecting legitimate security concerns. When the session ended, Janae gathered her belongings and prepared to leave the chamber. As she walked toward the exit, several delegates approached her to express their gratitude for her actions during the attack. They acknowledged that she had probably saved many lives by stopping the intruders. They men walked with her toward their quarters and asked what she thought would happen next. Janae replied that things would definitely be different from now on, but that change was not necessarily bad as long as it led to better understanding between species. She explained that humans had always known they would eventually need to prove themselves to be accepted as equals in galactic society. The attack had provided an opportunity to demonstrate human capabilities under circumstances that no one could question or dismiss. The challenge now would be managing the new relationships and expectations that would result from this incident. Some species would want to become closer allies, while others might become more suspicious or hostile. Earth would need to navigate these changing dynamics very carefully. Over the following weeks and months, the effects of the incident continued to ripple through galactic politics. Trade negotiations that had previously been difficult suddenly became much easier as other species showed more respect for human positions. Military cooperation agreements that had been stalled for years were suddenly approved by alien governments, but there were also negative consequences. Some species began viewing humans as a potential threat rather than as primitive allies. Several worlds imposed new restrictions on human visitors, and some existing agreements were renegotiated under less favorable terms. Janae continued her diplomatic work, but she noticed that her interactions with other species had fundamentally changed. They no longer dismissed her opinions or treated her with condescension, but they also seemed more cautious and calculating in their discussions with her. She had achieved the respect that humans deserved, but she had also lost the advantage of being underestimated. The galaxy now knew that humans could be dangerous when threatened, and this knowledge would shape all future relationships between Earth and